The forest had always been calm for Mark. He had worked as a ranger there for many years and knew its moods well. Some days it felt alive and welcoming. Other days it felt distant but still familiar. This morning was different. From the moment Mark parked his truck near the old service road, he felt uneasy. The air was thick and still. The usual sounds of birds and insects were missing. Even his footsteps sounded too loud as he walked deeper into the woods. Mark checked his map and radio. Everything looked normal. There were no reports of lost hikers or animal trouble. Still, something pulled him forward, like the forest wanted him to see something. He followed a narrow path that did not exist on his maps. The ground was pressed flat as if something heavy had passed through many times. Branches were bent and broken at strange angles. Not snapped by wind, but pushed aside with strength. Mark slowed his pace. His training told him to stay alert. Large animals sometimes moved through this area, but none left signs like these. After several minutes, the trees opened into a clearing. Sunlight fell across the ground in uneven patches. Mark stopped walking. In the center of the clearing was something that made his chest tighten. A giant nest rested between three thick trees. It was massive. Bigger than a small car. Built low to the ground instead of high in the trees. The nest was made from heavy branches, thick vines, and strips of bark. Some of the bark had been ripped clean from living trees nearby. The work looked deliberate, careful, planned. Mark had seen nests before. Eagle nests, hawk nests, even large bird shelters. This was nothing like any of them. The ground around the nest was marked with deep impressions. Wide, uneven shapes pressed into the soil. They were not paw prints. They were not hoof marks. They looked almost like footprints, but wrong in size and shape. Mark felt cold despite the warm sun. He reminded himself to stay calm. Fear made people imagine things. He took a slow step closer. Then another. A sharp smell reached him. Metallic and damp. It reminded him of rust mixed with wet leaves. It was not the smell of animals he knew. Mark covered his nose and leaned slightly forward. Inside the nest were large shapes covered in moss, leaves, and dirt. At first they looked like stones gathered together. Then one of the shapes moved. Only a little. Just enough to make Mark stop breathing. His heart began to race. His hand went to his radio, but he did not press the button yet. He needed to understand what he was seeing. The shape shifted again. Slow and controlled. As if whatever was beneath the leaves knew it was being watched. Mark stepped back carefully. That was when he noticed something near the edge of the nest. A backpack. It was old and torn. The fabric was faded blue. One strap was broken and the zipper hung open. Mark recognized the style. Hikers used bags like that. Campers too. This was no longer just wildlife. This involved people. Mark scanned the clearing. There were no tents. No campfire remains. No signs of a normal campsite. His mouth went dry. The forest felt smaller now. Closer. He took another step back. A twig snapped under his boot. The movement inside the nest stopped. For a moment everything was silent. Then the leaves shifted again. This time more of the shape was revealed. Not enough to fully see it. Enough to know it was not an animal. The form beneath the covering was upright. Still. Too still. Mark felt his legs tense. Every instinct told him to leave. He turned and moved fast but quietly. He did not run yet. He did not want to draw attention. As he reached the edge of the clearing, he heard a soft sound behind him. Not a growl. Not a call. Something like slow breathing. That was enough. Mark ran. He pushed through bushes and branches. He did not follow the path back. He followed his memory of the land. Heart pounding. Breath burning in his chest. He did not stop until he reached his truck. His hands shook as he unlocked the door and climbed inside. For several seconds he just sat there, listening, waiting for something to follow. Nothing came. Mark grabbed his phone. His fingers hesitated over the screen. Calling for backup was not something he did lightly. But this was not normal ranger work. There was a nest in the woods. A giant nest. And inside it was something that should not exist. And there were signs that people had been there. Mark finally made the call. His voice was steady but low as he explained what he had seen. He asked for police assistance and did not give theories. Only facts. When the call ended, Mark leaned back in his seat. His eyes stayed fixed on the tree line. The forest looked the same as it always had. Tall, quiet, and green. But Mark knew the truth now. Something was hidden deep inside it. Something carefully built. Something watching. And whatever it was, it had already crossed a line that could not be undone. The police arrived later that afternoon. 2 vehicles rolled slowly along the dirt road and stopped near Mark's truck. The forest remained quiet as if nothing unusual had happened. Mark stood beside his vehicle and watched the officers step out. There were 3 of them. Calm, alert, and serious. Mark explained everything again. The broken branches. The strange path. The giant nest. The backpack. He did not describe what he thought it was. Only what he had seen. The officers listened carefully. One of them, named Lewis, asked clear questions. How far was the clearing? Did Mark see anyone nearby? Was there any sign of recent camping? Mark answered honestly. No people. No camp. Only the nest. They decided to move together. Slow and careful. Mark led the way back into the woods. Every step felt heavier than before. The forest still seemed too silent. No birds returned. No wind moved the leaves. As they followed the narrow path, the officers noticed the same signs Mark had. Bent branches. Flattened ground. Marks pressed deep into the soil. Lewis crouched down to examine one of them. He did not say much, but his face showed concern. When the clearing came into view, the group stopped. The nest was still there, large and unmoving. Nothing appeared disturbed. No signs that whatever was inside had left. The officers spread out. They moved slowly with caution. Their eyes stayed fixed on the nest. Lewis raised a hand and signaled everyone to stop. The smell reached them again, metallic and damp. One officer named Ryan covered his mouth and shook his head. This was not normal. They moved closer, step by step. From this distance the nest looked even larger. The branches were woven together with purpose. Not random. Not rushed. Mark noticed something new. Near the backpack lay other items. A shoe. A torn jacket. Pieces of fabric scattered like they had been dragged. Lewis frowned. This was no longer a mystery. It was an investigation. He spoke into his radio quietly, requesting more support. Medical teams. Search units. As he finished speaking, the leaves inside the nest shifted. Everyone froze. The movement was slow, careful, as if whatever was beneath the covering was aware of them. Mark felt his chest tighten. The officers stood their ground but adjusted their stance. The shape beneath the leaves rose slightly, not standing, not lying flat. Ryan whispered that it looked human, but wrong. Too still, too silent. No one moved closer. Lewis raised his voice, calling out, asking if anyone was there, if they needed help. There was no answer. The shape did not respond. It did not turn. It did not move again. The officers exchanged looks. This situation had crossed into something serious. They decided not to approach further. Not without proper equipment and backup. They marked the area, placed tape around the clearing, and documented everything they could see from a distance. Mark watched quietly. His role was done. But his thoughts were racing. Who would build something like this? Why here? Why hide it? As they stepped away from the clearing, a sound echoed faintly through the trees. Not a voice. Not a call. Just a low sound that felt like breath passing through leaves. Everyone stopped again. Lewis looked at Mark. Mark shook his head. He had never heard anything like that before. They did not wait to investigate. They continued back to the road. More vehicles arrived soon after. Lights flashing softly through the trees. Medical teams. Search teams. More officers. The forest filled with movement for the first time that day. Mark gave his statement again. This time recorded. He stayed calm. He focused on facts. As night approached, the area was closed. No hikers allowed. No campers. No access beyond the road. Mark sat on the back of his truck and watched the activity. Part of him wanted to leave. Another part could not look away. Lewis approached him and sat nearby. He told Mark they had found records of missing hikers from nearby regions. Nothing confirmed yet, but enough to raise serious concern. The nest would be examined in the morning. With specialists. With safety teams. Mark nodded. He knew that once daylight came, the truth would surface. As darkness settled, the forest remained quiet. Too quiet. Mark looked toward the tree line. The clearing was hidden from view. But he felt certain something was watching from within. Not moving. Not attacking. Just waiting. Whatever had built that nest had planned carefully. It had chosen a place few people visited. It had stayed hidden for a long time. And now, it had been found. As Mark drove home later that night, the image stayed with him. The nest. The backpack. The shape beneath the leaves. Sleep did not come easily. The forest he loved was no longer just a place of work. It had become a place of unanswered questions. And the morning would bring answers whether anyone was ready or not. Morning arrived slowly over the forest. A pale light filtered through the trees and revealed a place that no longer felt natural. The road near the clearing was blocked. Warning signs stood where hikers once passed freely. Mark arrived early. He had barely slept. The image of the nest stayed in his mind all night. Several vehicles were already parked. More than the day before. Officers stood together speaking quietly. A few people wore different uniforms with tools and equipment. Lewis greeted Mark with a nod. His face looked tired but focused. They walked together toward the clearing. The forest still felt silent. But now it was a tense silence. The kind that waited for something to happen. As they approached the clearing, Mark noticed how different it looked. Tape marked the area. Small flags stood near items on the ground. Everything felt careful and controlled. The nest sat exactly where it had been. Large and unmoving. Still resting between the trees like it belonged there. A group stood at a distance. No one rushed forward. Every step was planned. One of the specialists examined the ground around the nest. The marks in the soil were deeper than expected. Pressed with weight. Repeated many times. Another person studied the branches. The way they were woven. The way bark had been stripped. They spoke quietly to Lewis. Their faces serious. Mark watched as a small camera was prepared. It was placed on a long pole. The plan was to look inside the nest without getting too close. Everyone stepped back. The camera moved slowly forward. Careful not to disturb anything. The screen showed layers of leaves and moss. Then fabric. More fabric. Clothing. The camera moved further. The image shook slightly. Someone whispered quietly. Mark leaned closer. The shape inside the nest was now clearer. It was human. At least partly. The body lay still. wrapped in layers of leaves and branches. Positioned carefully. Mark felt his throat tighten. This was no accident. This was no animal behavior. The camera revealed more. Several items placed nearby. Shoes, bags, personal belongings. Not scattered. Arranged. The nest was not a shelter. It was a place of storage. Lewis ordered the camera pulled back. No one spoke for a moment. The truth was beginning to form. But no one said it out loud. The specialists discussed quietly. This was not random. Someone had been bringing people here. Or bringing something that once was people. The nest had been built over time. Carefully. Repeatedly. Mark felt a chill move through him. He had walked these woods for years. And never noticed. A team began documenting everything. Photos. Measurements. Notes. The forest no longer felt empty. It felt watched. Later in the morning search teams spread out. They moved through nearby areas. Looking for more signs. Mark joined one group. Walking slowly. Scanning the ground. They found another path. Less clear. But pressed into the soil. Leading deeper into the woods. Along the way they found scraps of fabric. A water bottle. A broken watch. Each item told the same story. People had been here. And not by choice. The path ended near a rocky slope. Nothing more beyond that. The team returned to the clearing. By midday, the nest was fully examined from the outside. No movement came from within. Whatever presence Mark had felt before was gone. Lewis spoke with Mark privately. He explained that the nest did not match any known pattern. It was not a crime scene in the usual sense. It was something else. There was no sign of struggle. No signs of panic. Everything pointed to careful planning. The forest had been used. Quietly. Over a long time. Mark asked the question that haunted him. Who could do this? Lewis did not answer directly. He said only that the investigation would continue. That answers would come. As the sun lowered, the team began to leave. The nest remained. Covered and guarded. Mark stood at the edge of the clearing one last time. Looking at the trees. Listening. For the first time in days a bird called from the distance. Then another. The forest was waking again. But Mark knew it would never feel the same. The secret it held was now exposed. But not yet understood. Whatever had built that nest had blended into the land. Used its silence. Its isolation. And now it had vanished. Leaving behind questions. And a forest that would never forget. The investigation changed the forest. What was once a quiet place became guarded and watched. Vehicles returned every morning. Lights flashed softly between the trees. People spoke in low voices as if the land itself could hear. Mark kept coming back. Not because he was asked, but because he felt responsible. He knew these woods better than anyone. And yet something had lived here unseen. Lewis often spoke with him. They shared observations, patterns, small details. The nest had been removed carefully, taken apart branch by branch. Every piece documented. Nothing was rushed. What they found confirmed one thing. This place had been used many times. The woven branches showed signs of repair. Older layers beneath newer ones. Someone had returned again and again. Mark walked the nearby trails with search teams. They expanded their range. Moved farther into places few ever visited. One afternoon they found another clearing. Smaller. Hidden behind thick brush. There was no nest. But the ground was disturbed. Pressed flat. Marked with the same strange impressions. Mark recognized them immediately. The same pattern. The same weight. Nearby they found signs of fire remains. carefully hidden under soil and leaves. Not fresh, but not ancient either. Lewis stood quietly for a long time, looking at the ground, then at the trees. This was not a single location. It was a system. Someone knew how to stay hidden, how to use the forest without leaving obvious traces. The teams worked carefully. No panic. No guesses. They followed facts. As days passed, information came in from other regions. Similar disappearances. Similar signs. Remote areas. Forests. Parks. Nothing confirmed. But the pattern grew clearer. Mark felt uneasy knowing the truth was larger than this forest. Larger than one ranger. One evening Lewis asked Mark to walk with him alone. They moved away from the vehicles, toward the edge of the restricted zone. Lewis spoke honestly. He said the investigation suggested someone who understood nature. Someone patient. Someone who blended in. Not a stranger to the woods. That thought stayed with Mark. He replayed every encounter he had ever had. Hikers. Campers. Volunteers. Locals. Anyone could pass unnoticed. That night Mark returned home late. He sat quietly, listening to the sounds outside. For the first time the forest near his home felt unfamiliar. The next morning brought another discovery. A small shelter deep in a rocky area, built low, hidden by brush. Inside were tools, ropes, supplies, everything neatly arranged, clean, organized. This was not chaos. This was control. Lewis ordered the area secured. No one touched anything without gloves, without documentation. Mark stood nearby, feeling the weight of it all. Whoever had done this was careful. And careful people do not disappear easily. As the day went on, officers received new information. A vehicle seen parked near forest roads months earlier. Always gone by morning. Descriptions were vague. Nothing certain. But it was something. Mark began to realize how close this had been. How easily he could have missed it forever. The forest had protected the truth. Until it could not anymore. Late that afternoon Mark returned to the original clearing. Now empty. Just bare ground and marks where the nest once stood. He stood there alone. Listening. The forest sounded normal again. Birds. Wind. Leaves. But he knew what lay beneath that calm. The forest did not choose what happened. It only hid it. Lewis joined him. They stood in silence for a while. Lewis said the case would take time. Months. Maybe longer. Mark nodded. He understood. Some answers do not come quickly. As they walked back, Mark felt a strange mix of relief and fear. Relief that the truth was coming out. Fear of what it meant. The forest would never be just trees again. It was a place where someone had watched, waited, planned. And now that someone knew, they had been discovered. The forest stayed closed for weeks. Signs stood at every entrance and fences blocked the old service road. People in town started talking. Some whispered that the woods were cursed. Others said it was just wild stories. Mark did not speak much about it. He focused on work and followed the rules Lewis gave him. But inside he felt restless. He kept thinking about one question. How could someone use the forest for so long without being seen? One cold morning Lewis called Mark early. His voice was calm but firm. He said they needed Mark at the ranger station right away. Mark arrived and found the place unusually busy. More officers than before. More vehicles. More radios talking at once. Lewis brought Mark into a small room. He placed a map on the table. Several locations were circled in red. Old trails. Hidden clearings. Rocky slopes. And one new point that Mark had never seen marked before. Lewis said something important happened overnight. A patrol unit had spotted a light deep in the restricted zone. Not a campfire. Not a flashlight moving around. A steady light that turned on and off like someone was signaling. Mark felt his stomach tighten. Lewis nodded as if he understood that feeling. He said the team was moving in carefully. But they needed Mark because he knew the safest ways through the land. Mark agreed without hesitation. He grabbed his jacket and followed Lewis outside. The plan was quiet. No loud engines close to the area. No shouting. No rushing. They parked far away and walked in groups. Mark led from the front with 2 officers beside him. The air was sharp and cold. The forest looked calm, but Mark could feel tension under it. As they moved deeper, Mark noticed small changes. A branch tied with a thin strip of cloth. A few stones stacked in a neat shape near a tree. Those were not natural. They looked like markers. He stopped and showed Lewis. Lewis frowned. Someone had built a simple system of signs. Not for hikers. For someone who wanted to move unseen. The group continued. Every step was slow. Every sound mattered. Then Mark saw it. A faint glow between the trees. A soft light. Hidden behind thick brush. Lewis signaled everyone to stop. They waited. Listening. No animal sounds came from that direction. Only the faint click of something small. Like a switch being pressed. Lewis whispered instructions. 2 officers moved to the right. 2 to the left. Mark stayed close behind Lewis. They approached the light carefully. And then the brush opened. It was a small cabin. Not a normal cabin. More like a hidden shelter built low and covered with branches. Someone had tried to make it blend into the woods. The light came from inside. A lantern behind a cloth curtain. Lewis raised his hand again. Then knocked once on the wooden frame. Firm. Clear. The light inside went still. For a moment nothing happened. Then a voice spoke from behind the curtain. A man's voice. Calm and controlled. Asking who it was. Lewis announced police. He ordered the person inside to step out slowly. Silence followed. Then the curtain moved. A man stepped out with his hands raised. He looked ordinary. Middle-aged. Clean jacket. Work boots. A small beard. His face showed surprise but not panic. Mark stared at him. He had seen that face before. Not in the deep forest, but in town. The man was Owen. A volunteer who sometimes helped with trail cleanups. Someone who talked politely and smiled at people. Someone who had shared coffee at the station once during a storm. Mark felt a shock that turned his body cold. He could not understand it. Lewis kept his voice steady. He told Owen to stay still and keep his hands up. Officers stepped forward and secured him. Owen did not fight. He did not yell. He simply looked around as if calculating what to do next. Then he lowered his head and sighed. Lewis searched the shelter with a team. Inside they found maps, notes, batteries, tools, plastic bags with labels, and a small radio tuned to local channels. They also found a list of names. Some were missing person names that had been shared across regions. Some were unknown. But all were written carefully in neat handwriting. Mark stood outside. His mind spinning. He remembered Owen's friendly voice. Owen's calm laugh. Owen telling stories about hiking and nature. It all felt like a lie that had worn a human face. Lewis returned with a serious look. He said this shelter was only part of it. There were other places. Hidden storage spots. And routes marked to avoid cameras and patrols. Lewis did not share every detail. But Mark understood enough. Owen had used his role as a volunteer to learn patrol times. He had used friendly talks to gather small bits of information. He had stayed close to the ranger station while hiding a secret life. The reason for the giant nest became clearer too. It was not built by an animal. It was built to hide items and make them look like nature. A strange cover that made people look away. A place no one would expect to search. By the time the group returned to the road, the sun was higher. The forest looked normal again. But nothing felt normal to Mark. Back at the station, Lewis told Mark that Owen would be questioned by a larger team. More agencies were already involved. They believed there were more people connected to this. Not all answers would come fast. But this was a major step. Mark asked one question quietly. Why would someone do this? Lewis paused. Then he said some people want control. Some people like secrets. And some people hide behind normal faces. He said the best thing Mark could do now was keep helping the search teams make the forest safe again. Over the next few days, more hidden spots were found. Not because the forest suddenly changed, but because Mark and the teams learned what to look for. Markers, patterns, unnatural order, places where the ground looked too pressed, where branches were woven too neatly. The restricted zone stayed closed. But the fear in town slowly began to fade. People finally felt like the truth was moving toward light. One evening Mark returned to the original clearing alone with permission. The nest was gone. Only the bare ground remained. He stood there and listened. A breeze moved through the trees. Birds called from far branches. It sounded like the forest was breathing again. Mark knelt near the place where the nest had rested. He noticed tiny green plants already growing in the disturbed soil. Nature was reclaiming the space. Quietly, patiently, he stood up and looked around. The woods did not feel friendly yet. But it no longer felt like it was holding its breath. Mark knew he would carry the memory for a long time. He would remember the silence, the heavy feeling, the moment his eyes first saw something that did not belong. But he also knew something else now. The forest could hide terrible secrets. Yet it could also heal. It could rebuild. It could return to life. As Mark walked back toward the trail, he felt the weight on his chest begin to loosen. Not because everything was solved, but because the woods were no longer alone with the truth. And Mark was no longer alone either.